Now, to finally get into the actual roaring 20s. The election of 1920 was incredibly significant, if only because, with the 19th Amendment passed in 1919, the national election of 1920 allows women to vote at the national level for the first time. The Republican candidate and ultimate winner is Warren G. Harding. And his whole campaign was based upon his hope that his presidency would create a return to normalcy. He felt that the chaos of the First World War and the economic issues of 1819, that America needed to go back to the usual. And one way he did this was through his campaign style. Many politicians would go on speaking tours or would sell copies of their speeches on phonograph. He called his the front porch campaign. He wouldn't travel much. He stayed from his home in Marion, Ohio, and would make speeches on his front porch. And people would come to him to hear him speak. Movie stars would go hear him. Regular citizens would travel to hear him. And he's sort of building this regular guy persona. While that definitely is his persona, not always the truth. He was known as a bit of a ladies' man and a womanizer, but tries to reduce as much of that activity as possible by the time of his campaign. His running mate is Calvin Coolidge. And in 1923, Coolidge will actually become the president because Warren G. Harding dies of an aneurysm. And there are many people who believe that his wife somehow poisoned him or caused his death because of his many years of infidelity. But we don't know for sure. One thing that Harding does do in his presidency, once elected, is he creates a Bureau of Veterans Affairs. This is important because there are now many veterans due to the First World War. It has become the modern equivalent of the Veterans Administration, which has a very important role, but doesn't necessarily do the best job of caring for our veterans. Another thing is that Harding is incredibly pro-business in the traditional Republican sense. He believes that the way to get out of the economic woes of inflation and post-war sort of the slump is to invest in business, which will create growth, which means we'll have to invest in more business, and just what will create the boom of the 1920s. This would be essentially supply-side economics. If a company increases production, then it will need more workers, and ideally provide higher wages to those workers than what had been supplied in the past. Not only to keep workers happy, but also those workers, when they're not at work, they are consumers, so they will spend more in the market. Then if there is more spending, there's going to be more demand because there's more sales, which means in production needs to ramp up. All of this production is going to be creating consumer goods in a new way that people aren't really making their own things anymore. They're buying lots of stuff. So now there's going to be a new range of stuff that people didn't even know that they needed. There are things like consumables, things that you actually consume and will buy more of. For instance, food, like Coca-Cola, that is a manufactured product. Or Wrigley's gum, chew it after every meal. And socially, let's just say, well, we don't want bad breath. Bad breath had never really been a major issue in society. This issue of halitosis, chronic bad breath. Listerine, the mouthwash company, created in their advertisements that, oh, she might not go out on a date with you if you've got bad breath. Use Listerine. Or you might not get that job if you've got bad breath. Chew Wrigley's. Or even cigarettes. Now we have mass-produced various brands of cigarettes and using sex appeal and all the traditional methods of advertising to get you to buy their brand. And then even Kleenex, disposable handkerchiefs. People always would carry a handkerchief with them and they would wash it and then reuse it. Kleenex were originally created as a way to remove cold cream. Women would use cold cream as a way to clean their face or remove cosmetics, but you don't just rub the cream in, you remove it. So the Kleenex was a disposable thing that you didn't have to wash every time. But you're going to reuse them and use them and use them. Ultimately, you'll have an empty box, and you'll need to purchase more. So this means more demand, more production. Bigger things that require more money are going to be like appliances. So vacuum, before this, if you would have a dirty carpet, you would take it outside and sort of hang it over a railing, and you would bat it with a bat or a beater or something and get the dust out of it. Now we have a machine to do that, so it is also improving the labor required to clean your house. Or maybe it's ironing. Rather than having a chunk of iron that you would put in the fire, we have a machine to help you do it. Or the Westinghouse toaster. This lady is having people over to her house to show off her toaster. Not only does it work and create delicious toast, it's nice to look at. She's also going to serve you coffee from her Westinghouse percolator. Time-saving things that look nice and show people in a visual, immediate sense that you have money. We even have this little this is a heater. Don't let your kids be cold after their bath. Heat them up with this product that you can buy. Or even radios, as new technologies are created, you can have this in your home. All of these use electricity, which is another product that's going to need to be produced and then consumed. Problem is, with a lot of these goods, they're very expensive. Thankfully, we have the introduction of an installment plan where you can buy now and pay later. This is essentially buying on credit. This, combined with inflation of just printing money, this will ultimately cause some problems. But this is wonderful for people at the time, that they can put $4 down and then pay $5 a month to have the latest and greatest item that they want. Another revolution in banking and finance is going to be something that the Bank of America creates. The Bank of America was originally known as the Bank of Italy. It was created in 1907 in San Francisco, primarily for the Italian community and Italian immigrants. It changes its name to Bank of America to appeal to more people. So kind of the opposite of what we saw with the case of Sacco and Vanzetti, where immigrants are making an extremely positive difference. Now, what the Bank of America does in 1920 is create branches. Banks used to just be in city centers, but now they decide to create sort of little branches in local areas. So now that means almost anywhere you can get to a bank and access your money, which means you can access it and you can spend more of it. Ultimately, this will all lead to debt. People are buying and they don't have the money to actually pay off those bills. Now, Henry Ford is an essential element of the 20s. He is most known for creating the assembly line, except he didn't create it. It was already being used in other industries, particularly the meatpacking industry. But he's the one who really streamlines it and makes it effective for producing consumer goods. And at its height, the Model T, which is the most famous of the cars produced at this time, it was rolling off a whole car every 3 minutes. Ford decides to pay his workers $5 a day. This was almost double what most other factory workers were earning. This was entirely revolutionary, but he does it for a few reasons. One, to retain good employees. And two, if those workers have more money, they will be able to afford more products, like a Model T Ford. This does cause some problems with other producers. They're going to have a hard time competing. And this is okay with Henry Ford because his whole purpose is to create an affordable product. He doesn't create products with lots of trim packages and bells and whistles. There is the basic model, and there's only a few variations. Do you want a coupe or a sedan? Do you want it enclosed or open? Do you want a flatbed truck or not? Other than that, it was accessible to people. People could afford it. And at 1920, he's become so effective at this that there's a major drop-off in price. It goes from about $550 for a Model T to in 1920, $395 for a car. So this is going to radically change how society works. He also is concerned with not wasting anything. So there is some wood waste at the end of the production process, and he decides to turn it into charcoal, but rather than put his name on it, he gives the company and the control to his brother-in-law, Mr. Kingsford. So now that Americans can afford to buy this product, the car completely changes American culture and the economy. With the mass production of cars and more people buying cars, there are other industries that will benefit from this. So the steel industry, the glass industry, they will have to produce more to keep up with the demand for their products. We have the rubber industry. We have people who are going to have all these cars that need new tires. People are going to need to fill up their cars with gas, so service stations. And now that they can travel greater distances, I mean, a horse can only go a few miles in a given day and then be able to make it back home. Now with a car, you can go greater distances, but if you can't make it home in time, maybe you stay at a motor hotel or a motel. This will ultimately lead, this economic growth, to big businesses, big corporations. We've got Ford, obviously, Standard Oil, which today is known as Exxon, things like Coca-Cola, even food companies like Carnation Milk. So this cycle of economic growth is going to continue to grow. This is why it's the roaring 20s. It's a boom time. But socially, this is possibly even more significant, at least for our culture. For young people, this is a revolution. Their whole social world before this was completely tied to their families. If anyone wanted to date, then the young man would come over and request permission to court the daughter, and they would stay in the parlor with their parents. They would sit out on the porch, maybe go to a few approved social outings. But that's about it. Now with the car, young people can go new places and do new things, and we see the creation of a unique teen youth identity. Now, going back to dating, this also can create some very interesting situations that these young people have a specific location in which to do certain things. So they have new freedoms, and one of the words on your slang lists is a struggle buggy, a parent's worst nightmare. Now, the economic implications of all of this growth are pretty good, but this is called a bullish market. And perhaps you've heard of this term, a bull market or a bear market. A bull market means that things are growing. This is because when a bull attacks its prey, it sort of swoops its horns upwards. A bear market paws its prey by pawing downward. So bull market is going up, bear market is going down. And you do need a little bit of both in order for balance to be achieved. But what we see in the 1920s is more and more growth, almost unsustainable growth. And a lot of this happens through investing. The stock market had been around for a bit, but it wasn't necessarily popular. But as these companies grow and grow, individual citizens want to be a part of that growth, and they want to economically benefit from that growth. So we have more and more purchasing of stocks. These corporations, however, get really, really big that some people start to just feel like a cog in the machine. They feel a bit like robots. And we see this in the 1927 movie from Germany, Metropolis, the fear of if we all become nameless and faceless. But this does play into this desire for heroes. The more people feel like they don't have this unique role anymore, that they've just become part of a company or a corporation, we see the growth of regular people who become heroes, like Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was a regular guy who happened to be wonderful at playing baseball. He was such a phenom in young age that he joined the Red Sox, the Boston Red Sox, at like 15, 16 years old, so much so that the owner, the manager, had to essentially adopt him because he was a baby. He was so young. That's where he gets the nickname Babe Ruth. He makes lots of records, particularly with home runs, and partially this is because he was a great athlete, but it is also because baseball's changed. This is called the live ball era. Before this, baseballs would be used until they started to unravel. Now, starting in about 1919, 1920, baseballs are replaced every few pitches. It takes about 7 plays for a ball to be replaced at this point. In 1920, Babe Ruth is transferred to the Yankees, where he would stay for the rest of his career. And in that year, he hit 54 home runs. Ultimately, he hit 714 home runs in 22 seasons. Now, this number is not necessarily as impressive as some modern numbers, but in 1920, this was huge. He seems like he is a superhuman. And this reminds many people of sort of the unimaginable feats of conquering the West and the frontier. People also liked him because he seemed like a nice guy. He helped a lot with children's issues, with children's poverty or health or things like that. In his personal life, he was a bit of a womanizer, but the general public wasn't really aware of this. So they looked to Babe Ruth as their hero, a regular guy achieving what seems to be inhuman capabilities. Then we have Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was a mail pilot, and which wasn't a very glamorous job, and sometimes he would give private flying lessons. But in 1926, he heard about a competition that $25,000 would be awarded for the first person who could fly nonstop between New York and Paris. So he decides he wants to do this, but he needs some funding, and he gets some of that funding from a group of St. Louis businessmen. That is why his plane is called the Spirit of St. Louis. So you see here his charted course to leave New York to cross over Newfoundland. He would probably spot land maybe in Ireland and then Paris. And he plotted out how many hours it would take, but he had to remain awake for all of this. This was incredibly difficult. There was a storm. You're going to get bored. It's essentially in a tin can with wings. There's no window. In order to see out, he has to look out the window. And we watched that little clip in class, which is included in Canvas. The last thing we watched was a clip about flagpole sitting. How with this idea of being a hero, that regular people want to try heroic feats, accessible heroic feats. So flagpole sitting, while it might be a little bit ridiculous, it seems like something crazy that can be accomplished, and that appeals to the American public.